Welcome, everybody. I'm pleased to see these are all humans and not AIs.
Waiting for the day when that reverses.
Oh, it has happened before. Because, of course, the AIs are on time now. So
That's the beauty of it.
although not always. Oddly enough, sometimes the note takers come like 5 minutes late. And it's like, what the heck? You're a computer. How come you can't come on time? Anyhow, welcome everybody. We're going to give a couple more minutes as the group joins here. People are coming in fast. If you're new to joining us here, we have a welcoming tradition we've done over the last couple of ones, which is to go into the chat window and type in the city from which you are joining. So mine says Seattle. All right, so Vienna, Buenos Aires, Jakarta. There's a note taker that can go away. New York, Tunbridge Wells. Wow, where's that, Julian? Freezing Buenos Aires. Yeah, that one we know. Kent, UK, Jakarta, Lima, Bangalore, New Delhi, Palo Alto, Mexico City, New York City. We got the time zones pretty well covered here now. We don't have anybody in Hawaii this time because I'm in Seattle for the summer. Houston. I bet it's pretty warm and humid in Houston, isn't it? Yeah. For those of you who are not following U.S. weather news, it's, I think, hottest day on record in New York City yesterday, which is a big deal for here in the city. Yeah. It's okay. So what do you think, Marcelo? Do we have a quorum?
Yes.
Getting
Yes, we have.
Fantastic. If you're just joining, please open up the chat window, type the city from which you're dialed in, so we see where the group is all from here. I'll be encouraging everybody to type questions that you have for Aman into the chat window, and then I will group them up and try to host the questions so we can drive the conversation that way. But let's get started. So do we have the recording going, Marcelo? Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Well, welcome everybody to our, I don't know, 4th or 5th for this year AMA session. I'm really pleased today to have with us Aman Rangrass, and he's the SVP and head of revenue at Skan AI. He's based in the Bay Area, I believe, the usual days, but currently in New York City. Skan is a Series B funded company that operates out of Menlo Park, and they have 180 employees, so they're at nice scale already. They look to provide insights into the fundamentals of how business processes are run within digital operations inside enterprises. And they provide, if you will, telemetry or a digital twin of their operations. And so we're going to jump into that in a moment, and he will introduce a bit about what Skan does, and then talk about a topic that I think is really important for everybody, which is how do you get to market faster? And I've seen across our portfolio, a number of our founders have been working with AI solutions, either added on to existing products or new product lines. And I think the process to move them from experimentation to actual
AMA session.
production.
If you want Skan AI, you know what Skan AI?
Rekha, mute. Thank you. So I've seen that some of our founders have been a bit slow to actually move things into production and into customers. And maybe they're a little concerned about whether they're ready. Maybe they're concerned about errors that come in, and all these are valid concerns. And Aman has thought very hard about that. And I think we'll have some very good insights for you on how you build your company, if you will, while you're flying the airplane, and make sure that it gets into doing what the customer needs, but also gets you out there and learning with the customers quickly. So without further ado, Aman, please let's hear a bit about Skan and your journey, and then we'll jump into some questions.
Super. Thank you for having me, Will. I apologize for not being on camera. The Wi-Fi at the hotel is a bit spotty. I'll try it in a bit and see if that works a little bit better. But good to meet everybody. What I'll do for the first maybe 10 to 12 minutes is maybe give you a quick introduction to a bit about Skan and talk a bit about our journey. For me, this journey started about 4.5 years ago. I'll give you a quick history of time there. But let me start a little bit about what our technology does, just so we can ground everybody. And some of the examples I'll draw on will be based on sort of what we do and how we do as a company. I'll start with perhaps a bit of a manufacturing analogy, which is, in today's day and age, if you think of a advanced supply chain or manufacturing line out there for any of the world's leading companies, you probably will quickly surmise that there is inputs that go in, outputs that come out of the other end. You've got multiple things that happen in that journey, parts that may be used for physical handling or construction, and there's sensors along the way. If something breaks down, if there's a deviation in what happens on the manufacturing line, if there's certain defects, those get picked up really, really quickly. So the reality is you've got a sensory ecosystem of things where you have everything that can be manufactured just in time. You have a way to sort of analyze and understand that pretty easily. So that's sort of the physical world today. You take that same analogy into the digital world. We take it to a bank. You think of when they're onboarding all of you as customers, their typical KYC routine, or they're processing a loan. You think of an insurance company that's processing a claim. You think of a healthcare company. You think of some of your typical finance functions in any organization. There is no such ecosystem at play to tell you what goes on, how it happens, and why it happens. So that was sort of the genesis for the thought process behind Skan. And I'll show a couple of slides in a second to sort of bring that to life. One fun fact before we begin, Tesla as a company, if all of you know, uses computer vision AI. They announced the availability of that as part of general production in all cars in October 2016. And one of our founders, who was then at Genpact, thought to himself, if Tesla can use computer vision for a forward-thinking approach on autonomous driving, why can't we bring that into computers? It shouldn't be hard. And in a similar way, we should be able to observe what the world looks like as people are doing their work. So that was sort of the general vision of what gave rise to Skan. I'm now going to just throw up a couple of slides just to bring it to life and not just talk through it. Give me a quick second as I do that. And you should be able to see my screen right around now. If someone can just confirm that, that'd be super.
You're all good.
Yes.
Okay, great. So the vision was, hey, we want to bring technology that can help us understand the work that humans do in any enterprise. We want it to be complete. We truly want it to be scalable, whether the team is 10 people, 50 people, thousands of people. And we want to do it fast. We don't want to be tied down to, I need to integrate into system A, system B, system C, and then have to massage that data for 6 months. So that was sort of the genesis of what we did. So we took the computer vision analogy I gave you. We decided, let's put that on the screens of all human beings in the enterprise and use that then as a mechanism to basically drive the end-to-end observability of all processes in the enterprise. So what we call as a true digital twin of all operations, right? We want to do this without any integrations, without asking enterprises for, give me access to your data. That question, as probably everybody knows, gives rise to a 6-month InfoSec journey, which you simply don't want to get into. And then you got to do this in a way where enterprises have comfort in both the privacy and the security architecture of your technology, because ultimately their data is their data. As we all know today, if you think of OpenAI or any of the other AI model providers out there, all the LLMs are effectively using, 99% of the world's data. However, that 1%, which is the enterprise data, is not visible to them, not available to them. And that's what we are going after as a company. So here's a quick example of how this actually works, just to bring it to life for everybody. You sort of see all this happening. What you see on the left side is effectively one of Skan's desktop agents using computer vision, much like you would on a YouTube video, observe every single action that happens in the desktop. It's traversing different applications, something that can be homegrown, something that can be a desktop application, something on the web, and you can see every action being observed and cataloged. And on the right side, we're quickly able to piece together, what does the process look like? How long did it take? How many steps did it include? What step was it? All through inference. And that's sort of the capability that we have built, which is creating what's on the right and giving you access to that in an end-to-end fashion. And how does it all come together? You can actually look at every angle of that data. So that data ultimately comes available to customers in any form or fashion they'd like, in any business intelligence interface of their liking. And that's ultimately what we provide as a company. So with that grounding on a little bit about Skan, I will now sort of get back to a little bit of our journey and what it took to sort of grow the company and some of the inherent challenges that we went through. Now, before I dive in, from a sales perspective, I'll admit that I'm not a born and bred salesperson. I spent my life as a banker, then a consultant, followed by building a product, and then accidentally happened to step into this role. But the reason that's important is I do think in today's AI first world, selling is not a core skill. Understanding the use case, understanding how an end enterprise wants to use a product is more important, and being able to solution with them and give them something targeted is probably what's going to get your foot in the door. Now, for a product like Skan, as we were building it, the beauty of a product like this is you can sell it into any enterprise, into any target customer profile that you'd like. That's the beauty of it. But inherently right there was a challenge as well. You can sell it into any different part of the enterprise, but then creating a targeted use case is equally hard. So I joined Skan in 2021, I think right when SaaS companies were scaling pretty rapidly. And as you probably see in the market, we added our first few enterprise customers really, really quickly. We then raised our Series B round in Q4 2021, and everything seemed pretty rosy. Then came 2022 and 2023, where, as everybody knows, the software market slowed down, budgets were cut, sales cycles lengthened. All of that meant what typically took 6 months was now taking 12 to 18 months on average for us. And for a growing company like ours, that wasn't a fun place to be in. So from a go-to-market perspective, the notion that we took on is you can accept the reality of the market because we couldn't change that. We took on the hat of saying, let's experiment, and let's experiment with everything under the sun. So here's some of the things we did, and for some of the founders out there, hopefully some of these things will start to resonate a bit more. We spent time on customer education, learning from them what are their core pain points, and really understanding what use cases are top of mind for them. So we kind of took the notion that let's not sell, let's just gather data and intel as much as we can from as many people as we can speak to. We spent some time understanding how could we actually get access to more customers at the top of the funnel. What events could we go to? What events were customers going to? And therefore, what would our roster look like 12 to 18 months from now, and where should we allocate our precious marketing dollars? We developed assets and then used our existing customer base to say, which one of these resonate? And if you had access to this when you were purchasing a product like Skan, would this help you in your buying journey? And we actually use them to then further influence those assets and sort of refine them from there. We went through the journey of testing all of the different outbound strategies. Could we use an SDR? Could we use email? We A/B tested multiple different ways of the same messaging. We tried different ways of selling into the insurance market, the financial services market, the healthcare market. So all of that to say, the notion of what we did for the entirety of 2020 through 2022, and then the first half of 2023 was simply experiment. The results might not be there to show, but keep growing marginally, and then use that as a foundation for what comes next. I'll also just add that we even went down the path of exploring how we could legal or contract with customers better. We would even plan on how best to hire people, what profile of people to look at, and use that as a mechanism again to lay that foundation. So all of that to say, 2022 and 2023 was 2 years of patience, and our goal was this too shall pass, and we'll get better with time. Now, the reality is, come second half of 2023, things started to pick up, arguably still slow, but you had two sort of leading indicators at that point in time. People you'd spoken to decide to come back. There's more inbound interest, and people who we met in person were starting to follow up. To me, that was the leading indicators that said, perhaps there's something here. Let's now make a heavier investment on both people and technology to take our journey forward as a sales team. And just for context, to frame it up for you, we had a team of 3 people, actually 4 people back in 2022. We reduced the team size to 3 in 2023, and now we're back to a scale of roughly 11 people. So we played based on where the market was. We didn't sort of overinvest, and we kept our precious dollars in the bank. So where are we today? And I'll sort of get to some of the other topics here in a second, but where are we today? We've sort of grown 100% year on year for the last 2 years. This year we're looking to grow about 150+%. We've sort of come to some conclusions here on sales and go to market. The first is, the days of Zoom and COVID are pretty much done. Everyone prefers to be back in person. You win business in person. You're not going to build trust, which is key to customers buying, 6-figure software or expensive software over Zoom. The next thing we've quickly also established is you should hire based on location and industry knowledge. I'll talk a bit more about what this means for my team and my hiring strategy. And it may come as a surprise to some people. I have no one co-located with me in Menlo Park. My entire team is co-located next to customers, and we have no more than 1 person per city. And that's sort of the strategy that we pursued, and I think we've been quite successful at that. And then the last thing we've done is, no one on the sales team here at Skan is a traditional salesperson. Everyone is a product person first. They're the flag bearers of the product and the use cases. And then from there, we sort of, invite them to take on the notion of what a salesperson would be doing. So we come at it from a product first angle. Again, that has resonated really well with customers. And, we are where we are today, I think, thanks to having laid that foundation of experimentation back in 2022 and 2023. I'll stop here, Will, but I hope that's a helpful introduction for everybody. I know I've probably gone a few minutes longer.
Let me help a couple more questions about the product customer relationship, and then we'll talk a bit more about your learnings. So, but just to be clear, you're observing, looking over the shoulder of N different people across the organization, and from that you were discerning what you're building the digital twin behind the scenes and figuring out how everything is flowing, I guess is the best way to say it. Is that correct summary?
So we're not quite. We're not exactly looking over anybody's shoulder. The software is installed on the desktop.
Right.
It's silently observing what they do.
Yeah. Well,
without any.
I call that looking over my shoulder.
Yeah.
Right?
You call looking over your shoulder, and that's one of the main I'd say objections that a lot of HR and legal folks at many of these large enterprises have
Right.
But once you look at the data privacy and architecture of the technology, I think they quickly get comfortable with how this could work for them and how they could message it internally, which, as you'd imagine, is a key concern for many enterprises, especially in the US and Europe, right?
Yeah.
Where anything to do with touching user data or company data is often looked at with a lot of skepticism.
Yes. So but you obviously overcome that to build the business you've done, which is fantastic. And just to understand your engagement model, if I were to invite you into my enterprise, would I have to show you how much do I have to do to define what the workflow is of, let's say, a analyst in my finance department or a manager in my HR team, and how much do you just figure out automatically once you install the software?
Yeah, so there's what we call as a day zero and a day one journey with them, which is effectively, you install the software, make sure the end-to-end infrastructure works. From there, as someone who's, let's say, managing a team of, accounts receivable or, claims operators at an insurance company, what I need to know from them is what applications they're using. And ultimately, they will help define what the start and stop of the journey looks like. From there on, we pretty much have everything under control with Skan. When I need to engage them, will roughly be a couple of weeks later when data's flowing, those dashboards are ready, and they'll come in and look at them and maybe they want to tweak it. They may want to tweak some names. They want to tweak some nomenclature, some labels, and maybe they want to add some additional, layers to some of the insights that we're gathering. But the goal is we don't want you, Mr. Customer, spending any time whatsoever deciphering and gathering data. Your job is to ingest that data and decide what to do with it. That's where their time is better spent. So let technology do what it's do and do it in a scalable fashion such that we can get this to you in a matter of weeks. What used to take, and I'm a former consultant, so I can make fun of my former firm here. What used to take us, weeks to do for one person can now be done in days over thousands of people.
Yeah.
As an analogy.
All right, so let's come back to the core premise that you and I were speaking about when we got this going, which was the fact that your software, when you first put that into play with your enterprise customers, it was imperfect. It was obviously looking at any given enterprise, there's a huge amount of complexity, right? And you guys made it just, you could have spent literally years trying to make it perfect before putting in the first enterprise, but instead you said, hey, let's define an MVP. Let's put it in with the customers and convince them to learn with us as we make this thing go. So Can you talk a bit about how did that discussion both go internally, right? How did you get your engineers to agree to do something that was imperfect, which engineers typically are a bit reticent to do? And then how did you get your first customer to allow you to bring this admittedly imperfect solution into their shop and learn with you?
Yeah. I'll start a little bit about, I'm sure some of the people out there probably read the book Crossing the Chasm. I think,
yes.
Yeah. And if not, I'd highly encourage everybody to spend some time reading that book. But I think part of it is finding those champions inside some of these organizations who are willing to ultimately take a bet on a software where they have a lot to gain with the software working. And they might not, there's not a lot of sort of downside for them. So I think part of it was identifying who those 5, 6, I'd say early customers of ours were, and then building the product with them. Yes, the product was completely imperfect. And I'll give you the perfect example. Our first 6 customers, they were all from different industries. We had 6 different use cases. And you can imagine the kind of havoc that wreaks. One was in Latin America, and the other 4 were in the US, and then 1 deployment was in India. So we had almost no overlap whatsoever with industry, use case, or in some cases, even geography. So the notion was get out there, put the product in the wild, see what we can learn. And what we did up front, which worked, was message to customers that, the first 6 months is going to be us figuring this out with you. Do not expect any results. And every single session we had with them every week, the first page said a reminder of where we are in our journey. We are in week 3 of the first 6 months. Do not expect any results, and we will all learn as we go along together. So I think what I'll just say to other founders who are just thinking about what a journey like this looks like is you have to accept and you have to find a champion on the other side who's willing to lean in and engage and invest with you. Don't overpromise, because that's what will ultimately get you in trouble. And also set that expectation, I think, repeatedly as you go along. For our product and engineering teams, what we ended up doing was similar to what Palantir does today, which is they've got forward deployed engineers. We effectively had 6 people stationed at each of these different customers, physically in person, because that's the only way work really gets done when you're building a product versus scaling a product. And all the learnings, it was pretty much every morning you'd get up, we'd do a call with all 6 of them collectively, gather the intel, gather the learnings, and then use that as a mechanism maybe to decide what we're going to do that day. And then we do a closing call at the end of every day. So product and engineering was on the ground physically with customers. And by the way, this was even true during COVID, right? So it was a huge investment on our side. We put almost $500,000 aside to say, this is the budget to get our people embedded within customers. And once we had that going, we then switched to, the other side of it, which was let us find a way to now get people back once COVID was over. So that's the investment we made, a product and engineering investment, an acknowledgement up front to these customers, and then finding the people who are truly willing to invest. To me, the hardest part is not the first 2. It's finding enterprise buyers who are willing to truly invest with you.
Well, that's where I was going to get. What you described requires a unique relationship between either you or your founder and the enterprise champion that's going to effectively let you in their shop and let you build the product with them. So that must have been some serious executive relationships that you leveraged, that you probably presumably had built earlier in your career or his or her career to make that work, I presume.
Yeah, I'll be honest and say if our founders, or perhaps even I, was early in my career, I would not have had those pre-existing connections. Many of those are relationships that we had honed over many years, and therefore the trust factor was sort of in there. I'd say for at least half the customers. And I'll be honest and just admit to people, like their names like Unum, AXA. These are like leading global enterprises. We're not talking about companies that have a presence with 5 or 10,000 employees. These are 50 to 100,000 people. So getting and gaining access into those enterprises is no small feat.
Yeah. So one question from the group here, and I will keep asking questions to Aman until you all type things you'd like to hear as well, because I think this is a fascinating conversation. But one question from Josh, just asking to understand your product a little bit more. You see in the chat there. So basically, he's asking, is it you integrate key systems and then your software tracks them? Is that, or do you? But I think you don't actually have to integrate, right?
No, the whole notion of Skan is no integrations. Right. Do not waste time integrating anything, because what's observable on the screen is the richest data humanly imaginable. And it's actually more important to observe the human behavior that happens in and around applications, in addition to what happens within those applications. Vanta could be an example. Like, you could take any application under the sun, whether it's a coding application or it's a Salesforce or a CRM or anything that you are using as a homegrown system. We observe it directly from the desktop level. Yeah. And that's what allows you to circumvent any need for integration.
So let's talk more about the trust point, right? So here you are, you and your founders are leveraging decades-long relationship with senior executives at big enterprises that obviously are reading the same media that everybody else is, and they are experiencing themselves when ChatGPT hallucinates, or all the rest of the challenges that people have, or can't add a row of table of numbers. And how did you build trust with them, saying, hey, not only are you going to let my AI sit in your shop, but it's going to look at your screen and figure out everything the user is doing and then give you some data as a result that you need to rely on. How the heck did you convince people that you're going to produce a reliable solution there? Not only that you're not going to leak data, but also that, that the insights you come up with are in fact real insights as opposed to hallucinations.
Yeah. So I'll go back to 2021. This is week 2 when I joined, and this sort of memory is etched in my mind. I was sitting at a meeting, and we had the chief transformation officer at a company, lean in on a Zoom meeting and basically say, "Look, guys, you're dead on arrival if you don't take care of 2 things: the privacy of my data, and as a second order to that, I don't want any AI within the enterprise." And then the second thing he said was, "You're dead on arrival again if by any chance any of my employee data or employee names are found within your platform." So that's an example of a conversation that we had as conversation 1 or 2 with many of these customers. And then we would gather back again at the end of the day and say, how do we need to now re-architect the product to enable this to happen? So one of the key features that we built was we don't want AI to enter the walls of the enterprise. There are some elements that are going to be contained within what we call as a server, which is where all that image data that you just saw that I played, that Skan observes, resides. That's where we perform some of the routine extraction and sort of all the data labeling and fields. But our model and Skan, sort of what we call as a process model, sits within Skan's cloud. And we found a neat architecture whereby, what we call as metadata effectively goes to the Skan cloud. So all of that to say, our AI does not sit with the customer's firewalls. The minute I use that statement, they will breathe a sigh of relief. So that was sort of step 1, because here you're sitting in 2021, you're not sitting in 2023 where everybody's got ChatGPT on their phones. And then whatever architecture we had to find a way to turn on or turn off certain features with a flip of a thumb. And as long as we were able to do that, we found that you were able to then circumvent certain requirements, even in geographies like the EU. For example, you've got worker council considerations to think about across all of the broader European Union, ex the UK. So what we did was we laid out a set of requirements up front with those customers and said, hey, you're a large company. We're working with you in the US. You've got a large presence in Europe as well. If this works here, you'd be happy to take it there. What are the requirements for the EU? Please list those down for us. So our first 6 customers were really the foundation of, really co-building the product with us. It's not that we and the founders had a full understanding of what it would take. We used input from them to inform and then change the product as we went along. And just to give you an example, we've gone from what was, the 1.0 version of the product, and we're about to launch 5.0. We've gone through roughly 47 releases since 2020. And all of these have taken into account new learnings along the way as we've entered the environments, and these are the complex environments of all these customers, and learned about all the variations that we need to introduce. So I'll stop there, Will. I've probably gone a bit in circular fashion, but I hope that helps.
Let me drill into another area that's related to this. I was speaking to a forward deployed customer success leader at ServiceNow a couple months ago. And they're a big AI shop, as you know, and we were discussing something that I think you've done as well here, which is how do you get the adoption within the enterprise to really get going? You don't do that by just, hey, this is available and or this is needs to be deployed by sending an email or an edict from a senior leader. You have to build effectively champions within each department who are going to help bring it out and get people to adopt it. So can you talk a little bit about your experience of how do you move from that initial beachhead that you have with one, let's say, executive sale closed champion that you brought in to actually getting broader adoption within an enterprise?
Yeah, I think arguably getting into customers, I think, is incredibly hard, but growing that adoption almost requires a sort of dedicated effort that I think all of us as humans just tend to imagine will happen overnight. So I'll give you the classic example, right? I'll give you two examples. One is you go across different functions in the enterprise, or alternatively, you go across different geographies in some of these larger customers. What I'll say is, once you've established, and there's a timing element to it. The way we look at it is, we have people who we call as strategic relationship managers, or SRMs, internally at Skan. Your classic hunter and farmer analogy. There are some people who are very good at farming, and we've got dedicated people to certain accounts. So the way we do it is, every quarter I look at all the accounts and say, in the next 6, 12, and 18 months, how many dollars do I expect to earn from some of these existing customers? Therefore, where do I need to make the people investment? Without the people investment, by the way, it's not that this product is going to magically show up in other parts of the organization. You have to make the people investment. So classic example is, we landed with the UK arm of a large European company. They have a presence in, roughly 35 geographies globally. And I have personally gone myself, along with our lead salesperson, and visited 7 other countries and laid that foundation. So when the UK entity was successful, we were able to have the UK entity do a similar session to what we're doing now with 7 other entities. That resulted in 3 other entities buying the product based on the success of the UK entity, of course, acknowledging that they wanted to try an experimentation before they deployed it across the enterprise. But I don't think there's any secret to the people investment side of it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people underestimate how important that piece is, because whatever's said and done, when AI starts to take over pieces and larger pieces of what we do, and it does stuff autonomously, the one thing that AI can't replace is relationships. Those aren't going anywhere.
Let's go there. I think a lot of the founders on the call here are interested in saying, hey, I've got a product, and as you know, our network is global South centric, but many of them aspire to build enterprise sales into the US, sales channels. And what you've described right now is a fairly classic and expensive enterprise sales motion. And I know you also been experimenting with how agentic AI can play some part, either at the SDR level, the RevOps level, other areas, to help make that an affordable sales motion. And that's something that I think everybody would be very interested in understanding. Where do you see, given what you described initially here, which is a very people-centric, classic, heavy lift enterprise sales activity, how are you inviting AI into your shop, and how do you see that being received by your customers?
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about how we sort of use AI internally, right? So, I'll start with the general notion that we've got, whenever we run an experiment, I divvy up my internal teams into groups of 2, and we always run an A/B test. So if we're going to be using, AI, and I'll give you 2 very simple examples here. For any product that you're selling into enterprises, there will be an InfoSec journey that you must go through. That is a requirement at every single customer, whether you like it or not. And what you also won't like is, you get these individual Excel or online questionnaires from them. Whatever you send ahead to them is thrown into the garbage. You will have to play by their rules on that. There isn't any way around it. So therefore, how do you reduce the lift on that? So what we've done is, we said, once we had done all the human heavy lift of, let's say, 10 to 12 quality questionnaires, we ran an experiment to say, if I want to reduce the time it takes to answer these questions by 50% using AI, what are the tricks that we can use? So we ran one experiment with Notebook LLM. We took all of our different due diligence questionnaires, dumped it in there, and then used a certain query mechanism to say, if this question comes up, what is the answer? And I'd say we probably got to about 90% accuracy in terms of what we needed. And the answer in terms of, have we managed to reduce the time it takes to answer some of these questions, we've probably got it down to about 60% of what it used to take us roughly 12 months ago, which to me is a huge time saving from a human perspective, given, we're tackling anywhere in the zip code of 10 to 12 of these a month. So that was sort of like, I break down my entire journey in the sales process into all these different chunks and say, what happens every single time, and therefore will save me time across every single customer on board. Similarly, when it comes to legal and contracting, by the way, I haven't found a solution for this. I have experimented with 8 tools in the market. None of them have worked as planned, which is unfortunate. But legal and red lines is sort of another classic use case where I do think, and I strongly believe in this, the legal function as a whole, in the next, probably 7 to 10 years, is going to reduce by roughly 70 to 80%. AI is going to take over the space. And you look at companies like Udia, you look at Harvey AI. I know some of these people personally. If anyone's families, friends are going to go do a law degree, I would seriously ask you to reconsider.
I've had the same conversation with people recently. It's a scary time to be graduating with a law degree, and it's certainly a time to really question your sanity to enter law school.
Yeah,
it's going to be a bloodbath.
It's going to be a bloodbath.
Unless you're using this to build a skill base that you're going into politics or other policy or other areas, but relative to the actual practice of law, it's going to be super hard.
Yeah. So I'll get back to one other thing that that some of the founders may be interested in. We've tried outbound, AI SDRs. I think that's another really hot topic.
Yeah.
I've run 3 experiments with 3 different firms. We've brought on SDRs at Skan. It's been a miserable experience all around, is my answer. And maybe we're not doing it right. I'll be the first to admit. I've just hired a new head of growth marketing to help me figure this out. But every firm that came in with these promises that AI SDRs will cold call customers, you will get more leads at the top of the funnel, I have nothing to show. I've dropped about $80,000-$90,000 there, nothing to show for it, zero.
So here's a question for you on that one, Aman. I wonder if that's somewhat tied to the customer segment you're going after. And so we were actually looking to a potential investment in a company that's an AI SDR. Mm-hmm. And they initially told me that they were focused on enterprise. And I said, I'm not interested because I don't think it's going to work. And you just highlighted that point for me. But then they said, no, actually, we're going after SMB. And we actually are using our own tools to grow our business in the SMB sector and look at our growth numbers. And so they actually show they're eating their own dog food and it's working in the right size of organization. So I think you have to really think about the sales motion and tools and application of AI based on who your target customer sector is, sector and segment, right?
I could not agree more. We tried slicing it by what I call as large enterprise and then medium enterprise. It hasn't worked neither of those. Yeah. We're currently running an experiment now to try it with customers who are sort of in the 500 to 1,000 people, like FTE zip code, because that sort of is probably the minimal size we need to sell our technology. And stay tuned. I'll let you know if that actually works. So I think that's where we'll land. In the enterprise segment, I think you're 100% right. It just doesn't work. Full stop.
Yeah. So one of the questions from the group here, just trying to understand more of your calibration with your company. What is your ARR right now, and what is your typical customer ACV?
Yes, I can't disclose ARR publicly, but think of it like well north of double digits. And our ACV classic starting point is somewhere in the zip code of $200,000 to $300,000. And then over time, for customers where we've been successful in growing them, we get into the millions pretty quickly.
And is that on a typical 3-year SaaS contract?
Yes. It's 3, sometimes 1, sometimes 2. What I've done this year is I've completely flipped the model around, and this was an interesting experiment I ran in December. We basically said December, Jan, Feb, March. Let's try offering 5-year contracts and see if customers buy it. Because if the technology is truly sticky, and if I offer them some something meaningful in terms of a return, where a 5-year investment basically equals 4 years worth of dollars, and basically it's 1 year free, they might bite. And we've had four customers with 5-year contracts that now run into a TCV of north of like $25 million. So to me, that tells me once you're in the door with some of these customers, there is true appetite to do this longer term. And a 5-year contract, by the way, I looked at the salesperson I think this was early December when he proposes post-Thanksgiving, and I'm like, what did you have over Thanksgiving? Like, what did you drink? At this point, a 5-year contract, like, no one's going to sign this. And then he came back a week later and said, here you go. They've agreed to it. So I think, look, at the end of the day, like, a 1-year model is fine. You will spend more time and energy renewing and renegotiating that contract every single year. I don't think it's worth the time and energy. You'd rather give them another, a few more dollars. You'd rather invest a bit more with them just to get them longer term, because the viability of that allows you longer term success. You don't want to be dealing with the worry of renewals and churn and stuff like that every single year. So most of our contracts, yes, are 3-year contracts.
Yeah.
And some of them actually have scale inbuilt across the multi-year period.
I want to come back to a word that you've mentioned, you've repeated half a dozen times at least, which I think is very important for everybody to internalize, which is the word experimentation or experimenting. And I don't hear that as often in the world as I think we should. And tell me, how did you guys build a culture that both encouraged and enabled a rapid experimentation, was okay with fast fails, was okay with taking risks like you just described? So what did it take to do that?
I'll give you the honest answer. It comes from, it probably stems from our founders who have zero fear on experimentation, partly because this is their second startup. And they come with a deep-rooted mindset that we did not experiment enough the first time around. And there's some things they could have learned having experimented a bit more. And I myself am sort of a big fan of that, purely because if you haven't tried it, how do you know if it doesn't work or if it works? And if it works, sometimes there's massive upside to it. And this 3 versus 5-year contract is a perfect example, right? So I mean, generally what we tell people is no one is going to get penalized for experimenting. In fact, if it works, you're going to be a hero internally, because some of the stuff that you can then unlock is something that we simply didn't imagine, right? And a perfect example is, I don't have a set pricing. I have no published pricing for any customer. Based on a customer's appetite, their willingness to pay, I basically create the pricing model that works for them. It could be consumption-based, it could be license-based, it could be anything to that extent. So when I say this to people, people think I'm bonkers.
If I was your CEO, and that sounds like chaos to me.
It sounds like chaos to you, but I personally absolutely love it. It gives me all the remit I need, because I can get very creative then with how we need to hit the numbers. So as long as there's trust again between the CEO and me that we're going to do this, my ask to him is, you don't interfere with pricing whatsoever. Just leave it to us. And if in the classic example is, we had an investor who looked at some of our contracts maybe 3 months ago, and I got a mail from them saying, these are 7 different pricing models. What is wrong with you guys? I said, that is the beauty of it, in my opinion, because I can prove to you that the market is not one. There are 7 different buyer types who are willing to pay 7 different amounts for the same thing.
Wow. Well, that takes courage to do that, and I'll be fascinated to check in with you in a year and see if you still have all 7 of them. Let me shift gears a little bit. You've done some international expansion, and you probably have some lessons, maybe painfully learned, about what does it take. And again, this group here is probably thinking about, hey, would it make sense for me to bring a AI-driven SaaS product from pick your global South region into the US? Would it make more sense to go into Europe? What do I have to really be thinking about? And you could probably talk for an hour on this topic, but what are a few mistakes that you've made that you'd like to educate people about, and how should they think about that at the strategy level for their company?
Yeah, so we started in the US, and now we've tried to grow our footprint in Europe. So I can talk a little bit about that. But I think for anyone coming into the US, I think don't underestimate the presence of gathering market intel and then being in person. There just isn't a shortcut to it, no matter what you say.
And that's true anywhere, right? You going into Europe or anywhere else, right?
It's true anywhere, but what I'll tell you, and I'm going to go there next, is Europe is even more in person than the US. And in Europe, I'd say seniority counts more than it does in the US. The US, I think, if as long as you are someone who's knowledgeable about a product, they'll still engage with you. In Europe, for some reason, I think there's a bit of a hierarchy, and that's something that we notionally figured out as we went in. So I'll say this: between our CEO and myself, one of us is in Europe every month, right, building that business ground up. We've hired people on the ground, but we are there physically in person. We've covered pretty much every city under the sun, from Milan to Zurich to Munich to London, and we are there constantly sitting with customers, checking in with them. We've grown that business to roughly about 25% from zero 15 months ago, just to give you an example. And that's by physically being there. And that is a real time commitment you've got to make and carve out. Europe, for example, for us, doesn't move as fast as the US. Decision making is slower. It's decision making by consensus. And therefore, you have to be ready for the long haul. The level of socialization required is higher. Even if that person is not a decision maker or has any influence on the decision they're going to take, that is still a requirement. And then from a product pricing perspective and sort of engagement and how you negotiate with them, even that is a different style. And that's something I think we learned the hard way. I think Europe to UK, probably enough similarities. The minute you step into actual continental Europe, if it's Germany or it's Switzerland or it's Italy, everything is different. Luckily, we have networks that get us access to the right people out of the gates. But even negotiating with someone in Germany is a very different feeling to when you're doing it in the US. In the US, you can be a lot blunter, a lot pushier. In Europe, you've got to be a bit more subtle. And part of that was, we started doing phone a friend. We would call people from who I knew had worked in this country, said, hey, how do you negotiate? You sat at the other end of this with vendors. Like, what is the expectation? What is the right way to have the discussion? What words do I use? That's how deep we went to really understand how do you actually do this and how do you do it right.
Great. We're just got a couple more minutes here to go. So one other question, and Josh, I appreciate your engagement and asking some hard questions for everybody here, is around make versus buy within particularly highly capable enterprises. Do you run into this question at all? If they're saying, hey, and whether it's for your product or others, do you see enterprise saying, I'm not willing to trust something that's this strategic to a outsourced supplier or vendor of any kind? I need to build this myself. Or do you guys have such a deep tech advantage and presentation that they look at that and say, there's no way I could build that. I need to use you to get this advantage that you're offering me?
I mean, you run into build versus buy pretty much at every large enterprise at some point in your sales motion. It is inevitable because there'll always be one, what I call as one rogue tech senior leader who'll say, I could build this in a day, or I could build this in a week with my team. So our answer in that case, and you've got to be a bit bold and take a bit of risk here, is go ahead. Let's run a head-to-head experiment. You build this in a month and we'll run it. Let's compare results. And usually if you're willing to take that risk, we found that 95% of the time they will fail because building this takes time.
Yeah.
And the tech mode is a lot deeper than what they give it credit for. However, you will not escape that argument and discussion happening internally many a time.
Yeah.
And that's probably the reason why, you ask anyone who's running experiments with agentic AI within the enterprise, they're probably running, somewhere in the zip code of 50 to 100 different experiments, all of which results in one going into production, which is a sad percentage number. And that's the reality. I mean, I was at the City Gen AI Summit yesterday, and I'd say pretty much every other enterprise that was there said the same thing.
They're all in deep experimentation mode. Yeah.
Yeah.
One question Anoop asks here is how much are within that experimentation of agentic in particular?
Mm-hmm.
What is the biggest or at least most successful agentic implementation that you've run across so far, in terms of how much responsibility and scope does a agentic implementation get? Have you seen anything that really surprised you in terms of how far along it was and what it could do?
I'll say two things on this. The first is, it shouldn't come as a surprise that everyone starts with customer service. Why? It's highest transaction volume, most certainty in terms of outcomes, and a place where you can experiment in small groups. So I'd say, customer service is sort of your first starting point. From there on, I'd say it comes down to identifying areas where your competitive edge meets high transaction volume and there's scalable potential to it. But I'd say agentic as a whole, people are still very much in, how do I even make this work? Because what you'll quickly come to realize is they don't have data, and without data, there is no AI. And that's the challenge they run into for maybe 95% of the internal processes, which is why, where do they turn to? They turn to customer service. They maybe turn to legal. They maybe turn to some areas of, onboarding employees or HR onboarding. They're very simple things that you can do with agentic systems. But to me, that's not meaningful enough. That's not moving the needle. And ultimately, what you've got to get to is some of your core business processes that involve the largest parts of your people and enterprise. And for that, I think the challenge they're running into is they don't have data. And that's where, we are trying to play that card now, which is we're on the next leg of our journey, which is how can we be the data provider to those agentic.
Well, I think if you can build the digital twin with the data you're building, then using that to feed into an agentic implementation is an obvious next step. So yes.
Bingo. Yep.
Great. So before we break here, a quick little sales pitch to all of you. If you'd please take the 30-second survey that Marcelo just posted there, just to give us feedback. Also, there's two links there. One is to a book that I'm just released in draft form. It's a book called Flourishing with AI, co-written with one of my friends and colleagues in India, Ravi Venkatesan. And we're really talking about how do mid-career professionals, probably people in all of your organizations, better adopt AI and bring it into their everyday usage model within their organization and make it part of how they will flourish as they grow their career. So it's very pragmatic. And of course, being a book about AI, it's actually written with an AI chatbot. So you can go and connect up and have a conversation with me and my colleague Ravi through our book via the chatbot that's linked from the Flourishing with AI website. And it's also there in Notebook LM generated podcasts, which are amazingly good. If anybody hasn't tried that yet, it's truly astounding how good the quality of the conversation that it creates as a way to quickly get an understanding of a particular topic area for a set of material, in this case, a full book. Also, the GAIN community is there. We now have a new AI-driven chat bot within the GAIN community that you can try out. So I encourage you to see there. It looks behind all of our effectively password-protected content and lets you search across that. So please click on those links, open them up in your browser before we end the call here, and that'll get you access to that information. Aman, thank you so much for these insights. I really have enjoyed the conversation. We could talk for hours, I think, on these points. We will, I'm sure, talk again as we watch your journey. And I want to thank you for sharing your knowledge and insights with our community so much. So
thank you, everyone. Thanks for the time, Will.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you all.
Thanks a lot.